Hi, and welcome to ThreatTraq Essentials, where we will take a look at some everyday cybersecurity lessons that we can learn from this week's ThreatTraq stories. I'm here with Michael Singer. He was on the show this week. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Don.
Great to have you here. Let's talk about the story Michael Stair brought to us about some API keys that were compromised. First of all, tell me, what is an API key?
Yeah, so application programming interfaces, called APIs, and more APIs are used to open things up and let data or processes be called by another developer, another application somewhere else.
What would be an example of where that would be used, where people would come across that?
I would actually say that everywhere there's software, okay, we're opening it all up, and it's all about reuse and simplifying, and usually the API is callable. You know, you just leave it callable at all times. So it's different than the old kind of model where all your logic was contained and it was procedural and only you could run it in this closed environment. It's just like, let other people call the data they need to, but with permission. And that's where you get to, well, how do I make sure the right people that I want to be able to call this API are able to call it and nobody else.
Is that
That's where the key comes in.
Okay.
Right, and then of course, if anybody gives you a key, including the keys we have to our homes and our cars, you just got to worry about protecting those keys. Somebody else gets a key, they can pretend to be you and have the same privileges that you do. And in this case, the key was exposed, and someone, of course, found it, over the public internet, in the public cloud. They found the key, and then they used that key.
And the response of the company was actually a good response. So tell me about that.
The first thing I noticed is that the incident had been going on for quite a while. It would have been better to have noticed, immediately. But when the company found out about it, they got a tip and they found out about it, they did quickly notify everyone and start looking at all the logs. They had a good response team to see exactly what had happened, and they wanted to see how bad was it, basically. What were they able to do? Were there damages? Were our customers affected in a negative way? They kind of sized all that up and had some, limited exposure, so it wasn't as bad as it could have been. They were able to report that, and then, of course, take the necessary actions to make sure this doesn't happen again. Issue new keys to those whose information may have been exposed.
So for those watching who are not developers and aren't dealing with security and API keys, a lot of people out there may occasionally get contacted by a company like this one that there's been a breach and there's been a compromise. What advice do we want to give people in a situation like that?
Well, I mean, if you get one of those notifications, it's good to look at your account, look at the activity in your account, and then, of course, follow the instructions that are being given to you. If they say, hey, you need to go here, you need to reset everything, definitely take that advice and do that as quickly as possible.
Okay, great. Let's talk about the story you brought to us about the Department of Homeland Security asking for some new authority. Tell me what that was.
Yeah, so Department of Homeland Security is trying to be very active in protecting against these cyber threats. They're very real, they're very global. And they're basically saying, in order to do a good job, we need to have more authority, more information. So that in itself is interesting. I really like their mission that they have of, we want to protect everything in industry from these threats. So in this case, they were framing up the problem as having to do with mission critical systems, industrial control systems, and the storyline kind of is that we know there's weaknesses.
Just tell me, where would industrial control systems be used? Where are some of the key areas?
Yeah, so think of utilities, manufacturing, plants, stuff that goes on and off to control all kinds of flow of chemicals and energy and turns things on.
So these would be areas where, if there was a cyber attack, we're talking about something much worse than just getting people's credit card data. Some serious things could happen if these were compromised.
Well, getting people's credit card data is bad, but they're focused more on stuff that makes everything else work, right? The underlying infrastructure, and those try to avoid those type of attacks. And I think the argument they're making, the case they're bringing forward, is we know that there are weaknesses in these systems. We know that they have things exposed to the internet, and we would like to follow up with these groups to let them know that we see, hey, you're vulnerable, you need to fix this, but it's not easy for them to contact them. So they would like to simplify that and have like a direct connection so that they can work with those people who have stuff that's exposed, reduce the number of those things that become part of botnets, or that could be shut down, by some actor because it's exposed to the internet.
So a lot of these areas are things that the average person may not be familiar with, but they're becoming a big part of our culture. They're becoming a big part of politics and civic issues. So really, people really need to be educated about these issues so they can make intelligent decisions, right?
Yeah, everybody needs to consider cyber threats in their own lives and be a good actor when it comes to protecting anything they have responsibility for, and realize that the threat is very real and it's across the board. Like, everything can be attacked by someone else if it's exposed publicly, on the internet, and that you have to harden things or remove access to the internet if you want to keep them from being abused by actors anywhere across the globe.
Let's talk about the second story that Michael Stair brought to us, which was about a company whose postage meters were shut down by ransomware. What happened there?
Yeah, so systems were affected by destructive malware, basically disabling those systems, encrypting data so they don't function anymore. It wasn't everything inside the company, or it would have been much worse, but it did have an impact. It had an impact on customers trying to reload funds so that they could do more business with this company. So it could have also impacted those other businesses if they ran out of whatever they had already stored up, that they were able to print off for postage or whatever other transactions they wanted. Once they were done, it really was kind of a denial of service, and they weren't able to continue to do business.
That's kind of like the thing about cyber attacks, is it's not just the company that was attacked. There can be cascading effects in other areas too, right?
That's exactly right, and that's what you want to respond to, and as quickly as possible be able to restore and put your clients, your customers back in business so they're no longer impacted by whatever the attack was against your own infrastructure, one step removed from those customers.
So what advice can we give people here, especially regarding ransomware and other destructive malware?
Yeah, so there have been a lot of destructive malware attacks. I think the first thing is just to realize that, and realize that someday you're probably going to get hit with some destructive malware. There are a lot of tools you can run on your systems to do backups on a regular basis, and also to detect the malware. Ideally, you have some very new kind of next generation technology that's looking at behaviors, and when it sees that malware trying to infect your machine, it says, hey, wait a minute, doesn't either reverses it out, doesn't let it install, and actually prevents your machine, prevents that destructive malware from being effective against your machine. But in the case that you do become infected with destructive malware, you can run exercises and say, how would we respond? And then restore from backup, and make sure your backups aren't connected in a way that they would also get the malware when the primary system's getting them.
You want them isolated so you can get your data back and never have to deal, hopefully, with paying ransom or anything like that.
Exactly. Okay. Offline backups is, if they're offline, you're okay. They could be online, but segmented in a proper way where there would be no way to infect them. But all that stuff's good for your tabletop exercises, for your drills, your exercises you do just to make sure you're ready. I think it'll continue to be the case that destructive malware should be at the top of the list for things we worry about when we're protecting our systems that we have control over.
Well, thanks for being here, Michael, and thank you for watching. As always, you can click on the playlist below to take a deeper dive into any of these stories. We'll see you next time.